Hi, yeah, my name is Patrick Woodhead, and I am the founder of Space Meridian. It's a company that spun out of Protocol Labs earlier this year, and the projects that we focus on are Filecoin Station, Filecoin Spark, as well as the Checker network, which is a new concept we're exploring. So yeah, I suppose, as Raymond said, we are in the Filecoin ecosystem, and we've been looking at sort of stuff adjacent to this, but I suppose I haven't spent too much time really in the PGF space. And so I was kind of questioning exactly why we'd be speaking on this track, and Raymond convinced me that it was important because we're doing lots of stuff on-chain, stuff which is verifiable, and we've got these really quick evaluation and reward loops, and we've got kind of few human-in-the-loop steps, well, actually no human-in-the-loop steps, and it's kind of deterministic end-to-end as a protocol. And maybe there's some other stuff, so as you watch this, maybe it will spark some other ideas into how this can fit into PGF funding. I'm going to show how we do this through Station and Filecoin Spark. Okay, so firstly, what is Station? Station is a deepened network which allows anyone to join the Filecoin economy. Traditionally, to be a Filecoin storage provider, you had to have quite a lot of fill and some technical chops in order to get going. With Station, you can download the Station app and you can start earning fill within a few clicks. So it's for the kind of larger, non-technical, non-financial set of users who just want to take part and start contributing and earning in the Filecoin economy. And you can run Station as a desktop app or in Docker or from the command line. This time last year, we first launched the incentives, or the Impact Evaluator, if you like, that got Station off the ground. So in November 2023, we had tens of people running Station. And suddenly, we linked up this on-chain Impact Evaluator, and we very quickly went from tens of stations to over 10,000 stations running. And since that kind of grew quickly to 10,000 in sort of by the end of Q1 2024. And then since then, it's been growing at about 10% month on month since that point. And you can see here that we've got sort of around 14,000, 15,000 daily active stations at the moment. Separately, what is Spark? Spark is a protocol which is a proof of retrievability protocol for Filecoin. It's creating an overall retrieval success rate score of the Filecoin network, as well as a retrieval success rate score of individual SPs. The data that the Spark, what we call Spark checkers, they're the ones who actually make these retrieval checks. The data that they create is available on-chain via the Spark API, and it's also powering quite a few different dashboards now, like Starboard, and also this new one that the Filecoin Foundation is building. Again, to show sort of how the Impact Evaluator has really been able to change, or move the needle on retrievability for Filecoin. Since the Spark data started being used by the Filecoin Foundation and the Filecoin Incentive Design Labs to determine the allocation of datacap, which happened in around May 2024, we've seen the overall retrievability of data on Filecoin as measured by Spark go from about 1% up to about 13%. So it's like an order of magnitude better by linking it to some incentives. How are these two things linked? When you download Station, you start running a Station node, you're earning by doing these Spark checks. And so these two projects are very interlinked because Station essentially means you're running a Spark checker and you're earning Filecoin for doing these checks. So now let's map Spark into the Impact Evaluator framework. And this is a paper which Protocol Labs wrote a couple of years ago. And we took this and said, can we make this an on-chain thing? Can we make an Impact Evaluator on-chain, which Spark can then kind of fit to the spec of? So we'll start, there's 4 steps. There's the scope of the Impact Evaluator, what impact you're trying to evaluate. Then you measure what's actually happening there. You evaluate over those measurements, and then you reward people based on the evaluations. So the scope of Spark is that we want to reward the impact of those who are making checks about the retrieval success rate of Filecoin and providing data around the retrieval success rate of Filecoin. And by doing these checks, the contributors can earn 1,000 fill per month in total between them for taking part in this. And yeah, in order to contribute, you just have to run Station, which runs the Spark checker. Those are kind of the rules of the Impact Evaluator, and they're sort of encoded on chain because it's 1,000 fill per month, but that equates to a certain amount per round of the Spark protocol, which is 20 minutes. And so people who are interested in taking part can say, okay, on chain we have this guarantee that a certain amount of fill is going to get paid out per round of Spark, and I want to be part of that. I want to start to do jobs and create measurements that can be evaluated over as part of this Impact Evaluator. So you can see here we've got a whole bunch of station nodes or Spark checkers who are submitting measurements into the measurement service of these retrievals that they've done against the Filecoin network. And the measurement service then commits all of these measurements on chain. That's the first step of the protocol. The second step of the Impact Evaluator, the evaluate step, once we have this record of all of the measurements on chain, that causes the trigger of the evaluation service to then take all of the measurements and go through them, check that they're all valid, check that they all satisfy certain criteria, and then essentially map that into firstly, the retrieval success rate of the Filecoin network and the storage providers, but also an evaluation of each of the Spark checkers who have been contributing data. And the evaluation service then writes all of this on chain. The evaluation service is something which the Space Meridian team currently run, but it's actually a deterministic process because you've got all of these off-chain measurements, you've got this open source repo, which is taking deterministic steps, and it's really just crunching over the data and then submitting that back on chain. So anyone can run this evaluation step and just verify that our team has run it correctly. So yeah, we've gone the first two steps. We've done the measurement of retrievability, and we've evaluated over both the people making the checks as well as the storage providers providing the retrievals. And then we come to the reward step. We've got the 1,000 fill per month, which has got paid in at the top of this Impact Evaluator, which has incentivized people to start doing the checks. We've then now got the measurements have come in, and then the evaluations of both the checkers and the storage providers. And then we essentially just distribute the amount of fill per round based on the contributions of each of those checkers. And at that point, we've got what I call a schedule. You can see very small at the bottom, there's scheduled rewards, and they're sort of ticking up. We have like a record on chain of the scheduled rewards for each one of these checkers. And then currently once a week, we pay out from the scheduled rewards into the actual wallets of the checkers if they've already accrued over 0.1 fill. I mean, this is just a technical point. We could have started paying out every single round, but it's just so many different transactions we'd have to pay gas fees on. So we needed a way to sort of optimize there. So yeah, that's the full process. That's the on-chain Impact Evaluator. It's, I suppose, it's a bit different from a lot of these other funding mechanisms, which I guess take a lot more time, have a lot more human in the loop. But I hope it provokes interesting thoughts about people in the retro PGF community about, okay, how could we use this smart contract? How could we use this deterministic, verifiable, step-by-step way of doing measure, evaluate, and reward? Thanks very much.
So if I understood it correctly, you can help the badge holders in Filecoin retro rounds decide how much money to give each project by looking at different metrics and then giving suggestions saying that this is how much should be paid. So it's algorithmic, like based on algorithms, you suggest the reward that projects should get for contributing to Filecoin and other systems, right? Is that correct?
I suppose it's slightly different from the idea of which Tom's just described, where there's an overall pot of fill and then badge holders are deciding how to distribute it. Instead, the model that we were thinking of is that you have a contract which people can kind of fund if they want to. It's like demand driven. So to give another example aside from like retrievability of Filecoin, there's someone who keeps getting in touch with us saying, I want to have a smart contract where I can put funds in, which is going to make sure that my website stays online. And so you could imagine a bunch of stations could look at that smart contract and say, okay, there's been some funds put towards that. I'm going to host a copy of their website on my node, and I'm going to serve that data. And if you could have verifiability that they're actually doing that job, and you could measure that, then you could reward them for doing so. And so it's sort of demand-driven at the point of like, okay, people want to fund this particular smart contract, and then you've got all of these nodes which are kind of listing out for where these funds are flowing into, and then they can do the jobs corresponding to that and earn. So if we go back to Spark, Currently, we've got 1,000 fill per month, which is incentivizing people to do these checks. But that's because there's demand for this data. If the rewards dried up, then people would stop kind of contributing to this particular smart contract and impact evaluator. So it's kind of demand driven. The funds have to flow into the top to get the whole thing to take place.
Program design that drive future growth instead of thinking about purely, like if you design it right, retro funding actually funds future growth, right?
So yeah, I suppose there's a few things here. Like, what are we actually trying to do with Spark? We're trying to improve the retrievability of data from Filecoin. The 10% growth was on the station network. Those are the people doing the checks. And so they're currently earning 1,000 fill per month between them. And so there's going to reach an equilibrium whereby if you suddenly had 1 million Spark checkers, then they're not going to be earning very much each. So they're probably going to start dropping off doing these checks. But if you had much fewer, they can earn more each. So based on how much demand or value you've got flowing in for a particular check, you're going to change the size of the station or Spark checker network. But that's not what we're really trying to improve. It's great. It's a great vanity metric for us to say we've got hundreds of thousands of station nodes. But actually, in the context of Spark, what we're trying to improve is the retrievability of Filecoin. And so it's really about how then that data is used in the Fill Plus program. And that's a bit I haven't touched on quite so much. But we need to find ways that the data that we're creating from incentivizing the checkers to make these checks can then feed back into the incentives of the bigger economic system, which is Filecoin, and then affect the datacap allocation, or if we find other ways to incentivize people to serve retrievals. And so I think back to your question, can we make it more proactive? I think that the idea would be that the more that we get that retrievability going based on these incentives, the more demand we're just going to get for Filecoin in general, the more deals that get made, the more people want to retrieve, and it will be a bit of a virtuous circle.
Yeah, go ahead. In the context of thinking about the Spark, evaluate, measure, evaluate, reward loop, and applying that to contexts other than kind of what Spark is using that for right now. One of the interesting points that's also very relevant to our use of the Spark metrics within the Filecoin community, when you start putting additional demands upon the quality of that output, you have to also think about what are the other incentives at play. So for example, a thing we need to make sure we war game about Spark as a metric service that we then start relying upon within Filecoin to reward not just the measurement checkers here directly, but we use that data to then reward storage providers for actually making their data retrievable in the network. Now there's this separate incentive outside of the Spark network directly to come into this program and irrationally game this subsystem because there's an incentive elsewhere that's causing me to do it, desire different metrics outcomes, even if that's not accurate. I think that's an interesting question for the broader space as well, is how are you evolving your measurement loops to make sure that you're avoiding gaming of the system? B, could you think about applying direct rewards for actual measurement of key, say, open source health metrics or impact metrics, which could get rewarded separately from just doing the reward process, say, in a retro PGF round, which could incentivize and reward people who are auditing or creating data. So Patrick, I guess curious, both how you think about failure points or abuse points, and when applying this to something like a retro PGF measurement process, what are some of the different challenges you might run into there?
Yeah, so just to try and say that back to you to a certain extent, we've got the Spark checker network running a station, which is actually quite a small economic system. People are not earning that much fill, 1,000 fill per month. And then you've got this much bigger economic system, which is Filecoin. And if people want to get, as an SP, they want to improve their retrieval success rate, they'll be happy to throw quite a lot of firepower at the station network to try and improve their own scores. So yeah, this is something that we do have to come up with. Like, this is an attack vector that we've analyzed in terms of the Spark protocol. To try and link it to impact evaluators, I think that this is, it's definitely something we're going to have to think about. There's like different layers of impact evaluators. And when we started the Spark protocol and we started mapping it to the impact evaluator framework, it was very much about how can we reward the station nodes for doing these checks. And like they were the measure of, they were like in the evaluate and reward loop. From May, suddenly, when we started working with the Filecoin Incentive Design Labs and Filecoin Foundation, and they wanted to use the Spark data for datacap allocation, it was the same measure step in this measure, evaluate, reward. It was the same data, but suddenly the evaluation was on this SPs, and the reward was on the SPs as well. So it's almost like it kind of forked. Like we had the same measure step and then 2 separate evaluation steps, 2 separate reward steps for 2 different economic systems. And then, it'd be interesting to do further analysis on like how, are they completely independent or do they start to like affect each other? So yeah, great question. I mean, I could go on for hours about this, but yeah, I agree.
Thanks, Patrick.